Welcome to Do Beautiful Things. I'm your host, Jenny Lawson, President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful. On this podcast, we explore all the ways, big or small, that people are stepping up to end litter, rethink recycling, and create cleaner, greener, and more beautiful communities. You'll hear from change makers, industry experts, community leaders, and everyday doers who are showing that when we unite to care for the places we love, we can make a real difference for each other and for the planet we share. So let's get inspired, let's get connected, and let's do beautiful things. Welcome back to Do Beautiful Things. Today's episode is a special one because we are sharing the findings from our very own Keep America Beautiful 2026 National Litter Study. It's a major snapshot of what's showing up in our communities, along our roadways, and in our waterways. You may have seen one of the big headlines, which is that litter is down across America by 34% since 2020. That's real progress. But we know the work is still far from done. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about what it really means to say that litter is down by 34%. How researchers estimate something as big as 32 billion pieces of litter, and what's rising and falling in the litter stream. So to help us unpack what the numbers actually mean and how the study was designed, we are joined today by the person who led the research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Scott, Senior Vice President of Data and Research at Keep America Beautiful, and the lead on the 2026 National Litter Study. David, welcome to the show. I would love to start out by asking you to tell us just a little bit about yourselves and about the other partners who helped to do the research on KAB's National Litter Study.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, longtime listener. We have been conducting research at KAB since the inception of the organization in the 1950s, and a big part of that has been national litter studies along the way. But we always rely on valuable partners to assist us with that work. So for the two large components of this litter study, the public attitude study was supported by our partners at the Harris Poll, who we've had the chance to work with for many years, and provide such valuable insights into what Americans understand and believe about litter and how it impacts them. And for the visible litter study, where we go out there and estimate how much litter is on the ground, we worked with the firm HDR, who's been in the space for understanding environmental challenges for many, many years. And the team involved in that study have a deep expertise in litter studies, specifically, both at the national level and at the state and local level, and helping communities and states and governments develop the best programs based around, valid and robust data.
Maybe we'll just jump right in, right? So you were saying we have a long history of doing these studies. So how many have there actually been?
Yeah, by my count, this is our fourth large-scale national study. We started in 1968, was our very first study. Since that time, we've significantly expanded the scope of the research at every single step of those large national studies, to the point that it's my belief that the current study is the largest study in terms of scope of litter research, I think, anywhere that's ever been conducted.
So how do you measure 32 billion pieces of litter?
Like most or many scientific studies, our visible litter study is based on randomly selected sample sites across the United States. We collected data at hundreds of sites along roadways and surface waterways, which are things like rivers and streams and lakes and coastal areas. And from those sample data, we extrapolate to comparable types of roadways and waterways and coastal areas across the U.S. to develop those national estimates.
But you also do actually send people out there counting the litter.
We do. Yep. Yeah, there were 700 sites altogether where we send people out there, all sorts of different places across the US. We follow census regions to help guide our work about how we do our sampling. And then we literally send people on planes, trains, and automobiles out and across the US. And one of the really incredible parts of this study that we're very proud of here this year is for roadways and waterways, we went back to the exact same sites that we went to in 2020. So we would have a true apples to apples comparison when we developed over time estimates of how litter is evolving in America. We couldn't do that at coastal sites because we estimated coastal sites for the first time this year, but it is a very large scale effort. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks in total.
It sounds like these aren't volunteers. These are trained people who kind of know what they're looking for. Talk a little bit about how they know what to look for.
Having done this now, not only at the national litter study level of those 4 very large scale studies, we have been conducting all sorts of litter research, for the past 70 years. So we like to believe that we have a very strong understanding about the best ways to conduct litter research. So we have a very detailed research protocol that the folks who go out into the field follow. Now, these are all environmental management consultants or engineers, lots of environmental engineers and scientists who are trained to go out in the field, properly understand the sample area, and properly count and identify the litter in those areas. And I will note that we count every single piece of litter in our sample area. So there is, in the areas where, in particular, we're looking for small litter, our judgment is that if it can be seen by the human eye, it is big enough for us to count as litter. And we have spent a lot of time developing the protocol so that these folks on the ground are able to identify and properly track the litter. And it does help that many of them have done this for, a number of years and have deep experience in conducting these sorts of studies.
It sounds like it adds up to a pretty high level of confidence that these numbers are true and can be helpful in that way to academics, to local governments, to state governments in their waste management planning and strategies.
Yeah, that's right. We seek to develop the most reliable and robust and valid data possible for all of those folks so they can apply those lessons to their communities. And it really does take a close eye to make sure that you're accurately representing what litter looks like. We all live in our communities and go out and have our own biases about what we might see on the ground, the things that really bug us. We all have some particular piece of litter that bugs us more than others. But when you're applying a scientific method, you can't let those sorts of biases get in the way.
So this headline, back to the beginning, right? That litter is down by 34% since 2020. Is that game over, mission accomplished, or is it momentum? Talk about what's changed and what that story really is.
Yeah, it's definitely momentum. It is not game over. It is absolutely an accomplishment to be celebrated. So often we hear doom and gloom from scientific studies. And I think when we can witness progress, we should celebrate progress. But that being said, yes, it used to be 50 billion pieces of litter on the ground along roadways and waterways. And now it's, 32.6 billion pieces of litter. That's still a lot of litter. It is momentum. We have a long way to go. We know the sorts of things that work. And we're always at Keep America Beautiful seeking to expand the footprint of those proven solutions.
So that's a big, huge number. And I really can't ever wrap my head around it. And I think when you all were building the last litter study and some of the work that came out of that, we sort of quantified that per American of the time, it was roughly 152 pieces of litter on the ground per person in America. And then there was the cute 152 in you, right? If everyone picked up 152 pieces we could pick it all up, right? So it really made that accessible. So what's the new per capita number?
Yes, along roadways and waterways combined, we are now at 96. So we definitely have to come up with a new tagline. 152 and you doesn't translate to rhyming at 96. And that is, like you said, it's really important for people to understand that, the problem is, when you look at it systemically, is a massive, massive problem. But when you break it down to the level of how we all live in our communities, it is a very understandable number. And that's really what we're trying to do when we put it into per capita terms like that. Everybody can understand what 100 pieces of litter, around where they live, what that would look like and what it would take to solve that. Not only themselves, but the community around them, themselves, their neighbors, the local government, local and national partners.
So be a part of the fix and pick up 96.
That might work. I like it. That might work.
So let's get into sort of the different types of litter we measure in the study, right? So back in the day, 1968, that first study, we were measuring what we could of roadways in that era. And then for 2020, or the survey before, we added waterways. So what's the difference now? This year, we've added coastal areas. Where's the line? What's a waterway? What's a coastal? What's a beach? Can you get into how we think about those different areas? Because they really are important.
Yeah, they really are, and they're very different, which is why we have added them. So yeah, just a little history. 15 years ago now, we spent part of the focus, in addition to estimating how much litter was along roadways, we went out there and we observed people litter in real life out in the wild, so that we could understand, what were the factors that contributed to why somebody would litter rather than disposing of their waste properly. And that's led to some really fantastic insights. And then as the conversation emerged about marine debris and the great ocean garbage patch, understanding how litter got out into the ocean became really important. And that's a lot of the waterway, that was a significant driver of the waterway research that we began in the last study. And now, as you mentioned, coastal areas, the distinction between a waterway and a coastal area, because they do sound the same. A surface waterway are things like rivers, lakes, streams, things that water runs through from one place to another in the United States. So, the great example of which is the mighty Mississippi, for sure, in the U.S. But there are many, many waterways. In my own backyard, there is what for some people might look like a ditch, but when we have heavy rains and there is some groundwater there also, that is also a waterway. Coastal areas are exactly what they sound like. They are the coastline, which is actually a pretty difficult thing to measure, and that's why we rely on our friends at the national agencies to help us define what these things are. But for us, it was a real expansion of our scope to go out there and count litter, not only in the places along the coastline where most of us interact with the coastline. And for most of us, that's places like beaches, parks, maybe boat ramps if we're a boater, or piers if we're a fisherman. But there's many, many other types of coastal areas. The largest of which are vegetated areas. Pardon me. Mangroves and salt marshes. That's over 70%.
Those coastal flats.
Yeah. Yep. Not tidal flats where it's sort of, it's generally pretty muddy, but more so, for those who are fortunate enough to live near the coastline. Yes, all those marshes that run out into the coastal area. And I should note, for our definition, the coastline, as defined, by the U.S. government, includes the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Gulf, and the Great Lakes. So we studied it in all four areas.
What risks make these coastal areas, urgent in this moment in time? I assume stormwater runoff, the increasing dynamics of weather, and changing climates, that those things bring urgency to understanding the dynamics of our coastal area.
It is the entry point for litter, along with the surface waterways into our oceans and the Great Lakes. One of the important things about this study is to recognize that we are trying to establish the what. That is our most important task, is to give everybody, like you mentioned earlier, the most robust, valid data possible. The implications of which are generally well known, but we don't dive into those quite so much. But to touch on them briefly, yes, pollution, things that are along the coastline that can go out into the ocean, do create pollution, the impacts that it has in those areas in that moment. So for our fishermen and sportsmen, this has a tremendous impact on the wildlife in those communities. And then so many of the communities in our coastal areas rely on the coastal area as a real economic engine. They need clean beaches. They need welcoming entrances to our national coastline. So both from an environmental perspective, from a wildlife perspective, and from an economic development perspective, keeping our coastal areas clean and vibrant is critical.
I am such a data geek, and that was so interesting. Thank you again, Dr. David Scott, for joining us. We appreciate your participation. If you'd like to learn more about the 2026 National Litter Study, please visit us at kab.org. We're going to keep this conversation going with one more episode. Thanks for listening. And as always, take care, stay inspired, and keep doing beautiful things. See you in the next episode.